What's up guys, Shawnthebro here, and in today's episode of the fighting game tutorial series, we're going to be going over double KOs. So double KOs are when both players defeat each other at or around the same time, in which case both characters are going to be defeated. Now, you can do differing logic here. I'm actually going to award both players a win when a double KO is achieved, but you could make it another draw. You could count it as a loss for both players if you're tracking losses as opposed to wins. So you have a lot of different options here. Now, it is going to be a little bit difficult for me to kind of trigger this manually because I'm going to have to set it up so that both characters can be defeated in one hit. So I'm going to do the same amount of damage to each character. Then on the same frame, or as close to it as I can get, I'm going to press both attack buttons, one for each player or character. And then hopefully we will defeat each other at the same time. So just going to do this little back and forth. Should be able to get one more hit in. Alright, here we go. Then the moment of truth. And we KO'd each other. There was a double KO. And then they start standing up just like regular. And then they're going to go into fight. So the round ended. It was a double KO. You can see both players were awarded a victory. And we even had some text on the screen pop up when that result was achieved. So that's what we're going to be covering today. We are also going to be covering adding text for draws for timeouts. That way you can see it happen as opposed to just they play an animation and it says the fight text again. It is going to say draw or tie just as an added little bonus. So we'll add that in today. Once we see the double KO logic, it'll be very simple to replicate that for the draws and the ties. Now, before we get started on this episode, if you want to check out the entire series, I'll link you to this playlist right here. I believe we're on episode 184 of the fighting game tutorial, but whatever we are on, we're very far along, and we're only getting better by adding things like online multiplayer and rollback. But if you don't care about any of that and you just care about the double KO logic, I will link you to this episode right here, which is the draw logic, which is going to be very similar to the double KO logic, so I'd recommend checking that out. But anyway, that's all I've got. So let's go ahead and get started. There's one thing I want to talk about before we hop into the actual logic, but it is pertinent to this episode. So let's load up another instance real quick, and let's take a look at a different scenario, but similar. So the double KO logic of being able to KO each other actually already works in the series without any adjustments. But there's a few things that are typically done in fighting games to minimize the time or the window that the characters have of achieving this double KO. So what I'm going to do is get both characters down low again. That way I can get the result. And if I do it right, I can actually double KO using projectiles. And so it won't be on a singular frame basis. Now, I'm going to use the homing projectile with my character on the left and my fireball projectile with the character on the right. You're going to notice that the character on the right is not going to get hit by the homing thunderbolt. So here we go. Let's see if I can do it right. Alright, so I executed that one correctly. And I will launch this fireball. The fireball is going to defeat the first mutant. You'll notice the second character ignored all damage from that KO. The second character did not take the damage from the homing thunderbolt. And that is because the damage was ignored past the frame when the character was defeated. Now we have this one frame window to achieve a true double KO. So you see any damage after a character is defeated is ignored. So they have to be within that one frame window. Alright, that's what I wanted to show. So we want to make sure that we can get that working. That way this double KO logic can really work as intended. If you don't do this, then the homing thunderbolt would have defeated the other opponent, and they both would have gotten a victory. But really, that should be ignored because the one character clearly defeated the other first. They weren't at the same time or very close together. So we're going to go down to our take damage logic because that's where we would check this. So let's scroll down to take damage. Now we got a lot of logic in this class, but here's take damage. And the logic we have here is quite simple. I'm actually only really adding two lines, two if statements. And so right at the top of my take damage, right below where I make my local variable, I check to see if the match state is round over or round over draw. The match state is set to round over when the game mode's one round function is called. When we call that function, we end up doing some stuff in the blueprint, and I won't go over the whole process because it is quite long, but we notify the round end in this function, and at this point, when we do that, we can say we have won the round, so we want to set the match state to be round 1 or round over. So once the round is considered won, then we don't want to have any more damage occur. We also don't want to have any damage occur if there was a draw. The draw comes from the previous episode, which is when there is a timeout and both characters have the same health. That is also set in the game mode CPP. This one is set in the round draw function right here. It's actually set plain and simple in the code. So when the round draw function is called, we set the match state to be round over draw. So if we are in either of these match states, we don't want to do anything and take damage. I ignore every single thing. Now note, the match state won't be set to this until the combo for the character is done. So if I do defeat my character, and let's just skip in here, and I'll skip through everything. And let's say I do defeat my opponent. Use whatever I can to get some good damage in here. Now, I want to get them low enough where I can use a combo on them. So, you'll see if I'm spamming my attack, it doesn't end the round right away, so it's not set to round over. So I can keep my combo up, but once the combo drops, the round is over. So it's not going to mess up any logic with that, meaning we don't want to do anything and take damage if the match state is set to either of these. Now, the match state is stored on the game mode, so we need to get a reference to our game mode before doing any of this. So first things first, I've added this if statement right here. If auto game mode equals, we're going to cast the get world, get auth, or authority game mode, and cast it to the fighter template game mode, so our game mode. And if this succeeds, we will get a valid game mode here. And if the game mode is valid, which it definitely should be in this case, then we want to grab the match state off of it and check and make sure if it is not equal to round over and it is not equal to round over draw. So first if here, second if here, and both of these if statements are going to encapsulate the rest of the function. So I can scroll down through all my take damage logic, all the way down, and when I get here, I've added two additional brackets at the end. So all the logic can take damage except for the local variable at the very top of this function is now residing within these two if statements. Now, one additional thing that you don't have to do, but it'll clean things up a little bit, since we do have a game mode reference set up top, and this if statement here, where we're calling round 1, we're checking to see if the game mode exists to call the round 1 function on it, we don't really need to make a new game mode variable. It doesn't break anything. It does work. We can do this, but we already have a variable called game mode that is of this type. And if we're in this if statement, it already evaluated to true. So we can actually get rid of the if statement where we were getting the game mode later in this function. And there we go. So that cleans things up a little bit. Now, this is basically if the character takes damage, but the other player doesn't have a combo counter. So either if there's some self-inflicted damage, or if this is a special mode where damage is being applied by the stage, or a stage hazard and not another player, we'll call round 1. But that's not quite all we need to do. The other place where we actually end the round and consider the round 1 is when the combo ends. Just like I was showing before, we want the player's combo to continue until it finishes, and once it finishes, we'll end the round. So I'm going to scroll down to my end combo function, which is right here. Now, end combo has all of this logic you see in here already. The only difference that you may have is this. This is what I've added for today's episode, this highlighted text. Now, we're not going to be able to do this just yet because we have to make this function in the game mode. But in our end combo, what we want to check for is if there was a double KO. And to know if there's a double KO, we have to make sure both characters are knocked out at the same time. Now, this will only be possible if they both receive damage within that 1 frame window, because otherwise we're ignoring damage altogether. That's the logic we just added in take damage. So, when we finish our combo, we were doing a check to make sure the other player did exist, and if they do exist, we check to see if their health is less than or equal to 0.0f, which is 0%, or basically they are dead. If this was true, we were getting the game mode, just like we did in take damage, and we were calling game mode round 1. But that's not entirely what we need to do now. We also need to check if there was a double KO. Now, we can still call round 1 because in this case, in my case, I'm assuming both characters won the round. So for me, I still want to call round 1. You may not want to do this if it was a double KO, so keep that in mind. But what I've done is I've added an additional check within this if statement where we got the game mode. Assuming we can get the game mode, we check to see if the player's health is less than or equal to 0. So end combo, we were checking to see if the other player, the player or character being comboed, had a health of less than 0 or equal to 0. But if our health, the character performing the combo, is also less than or equal to 0, there was a double KO. For both of these to be true, both characters had to be defeated at the same time, or again within that 1 frame window, and so the characters KO'd each other, there was a double KO. So if player health is less than or equal to 0, then I call my game mode display double KO text. We're going to have to make this function, so just set up this if statement right here, and let's go into the fighter template game mode.h. In this class, we can scroll down, and let's go to our blueprint implementable events if you have them. I have one called trigger match win effects, which is a little slowdown that I use when we win the match just for dramatic effect. And below that, I've made 2 new functions. So I have one to display the draw or tie text to the HUD, and then another to display the double KO text to the HUD. So these are going to call the corresponding HUD functions. I believe this should be done from the game mode, since the game mode is the one that determines this was a draw or this is the current match state, and it knows exactly where we are in the current match. So I've made 2 new functions, both U functions, both blueprint implementable events. Blueprint implementable events are ones that we don't set up in the code. We create them in the code, and we can call them in the code, but we handle all their logic in the blueprint. This is important because right now the character HUD, or the base game mode HUD, is entirely blueprint, and so we do need to access it in the blueprint, but we can still call these from the correct locations in code. And so, again, void display draw text. This is going to say draw or tie when we end up having both characters have the same amount of health at the end of a round when the match times out. And then we have display double KO text. And this is going to say double KO. Then once the characters stand up, it's going to say fight like usual. Also a U-function blueprint implementable event. Let's go back to the fighter template character.cpp and wrap this up. So now when we're checking to see if the player health is less than or equal to 0.0f, we can use our game mode variable that we have in here to call our new function, which is the display double KO text. We'll fill this logic out in a few minutes. Let's go to the fighter template game mode really quickly and figure out where we should call display draw text. So fighter template game mode, we have a function called round draw. Here's where we set our match state to round over draw like I was shown earlier. Right after that point, once we set the match state, we can add our display draw text function here. And now we need to fill out both of these new functions or events that we made in the game mode within the blueprints. So let's go to the editor and let's open up our default game mode BP, or our base game mode BP. And we're going to add these 2 new events. Everything else in here is the same except for one thing, which I will show you. But let's grab these events first, and then I'll explain what we need to do. So now that we have our events in the game mode, we should be able to search event and then the name of the event. So display draw text right here. And event display double KO text right here. Once you have these 2 events, we want to call a function on the HUD to display this. Because if we go to our HUD, we had functions in here for make ready text, make fight text. So we were determining what text should display on the HUD in that middle screen text variable, which is this right here. So we need to access the HUD and then call a function on it to set the proper text. Now, back in our game mode BP, what we are going to need is a HUD reference. We do create the HUD from the game mode BP, but we never had a reference to it until today's episode. If I go to my level streamed in event, this is basically my begin play. If you're not using level streaming, you can use your begin play. But if you follow the series, we use level streaming, and so I call this event once we load into a level where we want to do things like spawn the characters in the game. In my level streamed in event, if I scroll all the way over, pretty far to the right, at one point we create the base game mode HUD. We create the widget and add it to the viewport. But we were never actually setting a reference to it until today's episode. So what we need to do is grab this variable. That way we can actually use it in these two events. So what I'm going to do is just drag off my return value and select promote to variable, and it will automatically make a variable that we can rename. Additionally though, you could make a variable, call it, HUD. I called mine HUD reference, and then you could change your type to the game mode HUD, base GM HUD object reference. Obviously I don't need 2, I only need my 1, but this is my HUD reference. And I'm going to set it using the return value from the created widget here. And then I'm going to add it to the viewport. So quickly I'm going to move this over just so I can make it a little bit neater. So put this in here. And then what I'm actually going to do is, instead of using the return value of the created widget on all of these places, I'm going to pass the return value into my set HUD reference. By the way, to get set HUD reference, if you haven't just promoted to a variable, you can just bring your variable in and say set. Now I'm going to use the return value of the HUD reference and pass that into the reroute nodes that I already had, and I'm also going to pass it into the add to viewport that I already had. Now I can bring this logic back over, and there we go. So now we have a HUD reference that we can use and call functions on. What we want to do is actually get this in both the display draw text and display double KO text. We can drag our HUD reference onto the screen and get it. Then we can right click on it and convert it to a validated get. Only if it's valid do we want to display either of these texts or call either of these functions. And if it is valid, we want to call make draw text and make double KO text, but you won't have them yet, so we need to go and create them. Let's go back into the HUD and let's go to the graph. And we're going to make 2 new functions. Now what I did, honestly, was just duplicate the make ready text and make fight text. But I will go through the logic I have, so don't worry. You don't have to copy them if you don't want. Make 2 new functions, one called make draw text and one called make double KO text. Let's start with make draw text. So in here, I have this middle screen text element. This text widget is a variable, so I can access it in the graph. I need to grab that, which is called middle screen text, and get it. Then I want to drag off that and type set text, which is weird, but basically it's just saying set the text within this text widget. And then we can put in manual text, or you could have variables that store this data, up to you. I'm doing it all manually right now. I'm not going to have a ton of words that are going to be set in the middle. So I have draw. You could also say tie. And we go about hiding this text as well. When the round actually starts, we hide the text, we clear it, that way the users can't see it, it's not in their way. At this point, when we're making the text, I use the term making because we're setting it, then we're making it visible. We can drag off the middle screen text again, type set visibility, and make sure that it is visible. And that's what I have here, just cleaned up a little bit. Now we're going to do the exact same thing for make double KO text. We're just going to change the text that we're saying, so you can copy these nodes and change the text to double KO. At this point, you have the functions you need on your HUD, so we can actually go to the default game mode BP, and we can call these functions by dragging off of our HUD reference. Make draw text and make double KO text. Double KO stands for double knockout, by the way, in case anyone was confused. And at this point, we will display the proper text to the screen. Your double KO text should be working flawlessly at this point. It will display the text to the screen, and then once the characters stand back up, it will go into the fight text like usual, because it's actually going to call the trigger new round messages event found right here in the HUD. And so this will handle all the fight logic that we usually have when starting a new round. So nothing new is really needed. Although technically it will be called from both players, but that's an issue with the NMBP that we're going to solve later when we get into changing the NMBP elements to code. I'm not going to touch that right now because it's kind of complicated to move it out of one user, like having it happen for one character and not the other. So you might hear the fight text sound a little bit louder than it really should be, but other than that, it'll work perfectly fine. It'll do everything that we want it to do. The draw text, however, is not going to show up right away. The logic that we did in the last episode was perfect for if we didn't want draw text to appear, but we do need to make one small change if we want that to actually get fixed, so that we can see the draw text, then we see the fight text. Now, to make the draw text work, we need to go into our animation blueprint and go to the event that we set up in the previous episode with the draw, which is our prepare for next round after draw. I'm actually going to get rid of the logic in here, but you could keep it if you want to have it just go from draw animation to the fight text. Otherwise, you see this event that is on my round over draw animation state. We're going to want to delete that and delete the logic with it. So we can come in here, we can get rid of the start transition event. Then we can go into the graph and we can actually get rid of this logic because we're going to do it now through the game mode. So once that's cleaned up, we can compile and save. Now if we go to our game mode BP, you can see here is my event display draw text, and this is what we had in this episode. But I'm going to add a few things on the end here to make sure that we can actually display the fight text and trigger the rest of the match flow after that. So we want to make sure that we add a timer, and you can do this by typing set timer by event. Then you can set the time, which I've set to 2 seconds. Drag off the event and type add custom event. You'll be able to make an event of your choosing with your name. I've called mine begin round after draw. That's what I've got here. And basically, once this timer is up, once the 2 seconds have passed, this event will get called. And at that point, then we want to call the function that we were calling in the animation blueprint, which is our trigger new round messages on our HUD. So we can drag off of our HUD reference and search for this function. And we will get our result. This is what we need, and that will allow our draw text to display properly. If you do all the logic that we just implemented, then you will get this result I'm about to show in 7 seconds. So the characters are going to go into the draw animation, the draw text is going to appear on the screen, and then the fight text will appear, starting the new round. Perfect. Now there's one other thing I would like to show, and this is just a small fix for the double KO logic. This is not required because I'm going to have an entire episode on this mechanic that I'm about to show you. With the double KO, if one character is able to win from that round, winning that round, then they will. But we don't necessarily want both characters to go to the winning state if they double KO and are both only one win away. So I'm going to go into my fighter template character, into that end combo function that we were just in, and in our logic, after we call the display double KO text, I'm going to do an additional check to make sure that neither player or neither team is going to win the match from this double KO victory. So we're going to check if the number of rounds won by this character, plus 1, to show what it would be after the round was won, is less than the game mode num rounds, because the num rounds in the game mode is how many rounds have to be won. Then we're also going to check the same thing for the other player of the other team as well. And if both of those return true, that neither player will end up winning the game due to this double KO, we can go ahead and call game mode round 1 here, just to make sure that both characters do get this logic. Additionally, we want to make sure that we don't call round 1 twice, so we're going to add an else, and if the double KO logic is not met, we go into this else, and then we can go ahead and call round 1 this one time. So don't call it twice, call it once in each set of logic. Making these changes will lead to the result you're going to see here, which is a little bit buggy because the double KO will appear as intended, but the wins won't go up, so the characters are not going to fall over, in which case you'll have to wait for a draw to continue on to the next round. I don't like to leave bugs in like this, but we're going to have an entire episode on what happens when we do a double KO in the final round, so this is just a temporary fix. That way you know at least the intended behavior and how we're going to handle it for now to avoid any other issues. Anyway, guys, that's all I got for you today, so thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed, please subscribe. It does more for my series and the channel than anything else you can do. It's completely free, and I really appreciate it. I also want to give another shout out to my Patreon members and YouTube membership subscribers. Thank you guys for all love and support and for keeping this series alive for all these years. So grateful to be able to work on this week after week. If you had any issues with the tutorial or any of my tutorial series, feel free to join the Discord community. There's a link in the description. That is also completely free, and I would be happy to help you with any problems you ran into. Anyway, guys, that is all I got, so thank you so much for watching. I'm Shawnthebro, and I will see you in the next one. Goodbye, guys.